The Rebbe Maharash, which is the fourth Rebbe of Chabad, was born on this day. And when he was a little child, he was obviously brilliant. And his father, who was the Tzemach Tzedek, tested him, and the results were outstanding. So his teacher couldn't contain himself. And he said to Rabbi Marash, so what do you say? Like, he's really amazing. So the Tzemach Tzedek answered, what is the wonder that Tiferes Shabbat Tiferes is doing so amazing? So Rabbi Marash is, this was his birthday, was born on this day. And of course, there's so much you can talk about each Rebbe, and same with the Rabbi Marash. One of the things that's unique about the Rabbi Marash is that he had a saying that he said, and even though it's just one of his sayings, but our Rebbe identified the Rebbe Marash with that pisgah, with that quote, to the point that there were times when the Rebbe would just call him L'chatchila Rebbe. So what was his quote? His quote was that out there in the world they say, you can't go under, then you go over. And I say, L'chatchila, just go over. The meaning of the words are that if things, thank you very much, that if things are in your way and they're blocking your path from progress, advancing, doing what you need to do, so generally speaking, what you do is you try to push it out of the way. And if it doesn't go, so you push harder. If that doesn't go, you push even harder. If it doesn't help all the pushing, then you just try to just ignore it and keep moving ahead. So Rabbi Marash says that his approach is, don't even try pushing. L'chatchila, just go over. Go over means ignore, pretend that it's not there. Just do what you have to do. And if you don't pay any attention, you don't give any substance to that which is getting in your way, then you'll see that it has no substance and it won't get in your way. Now you found out is the Rebbe Marash. I mean, every Rebbe has their sayings, but this particular saying is from Rebbe Marash. Like when the Rebbe would ask to sing his niggin, would say, sing the niggin of L'chatchila Rebbe. The Rebbe of L'chatchila Rebbe. It became like his name, and this is what defines the Rebbe Marash L'chatchila Rebbe. I remember in 1983, it was 100 years from the passing of the Rebbe Marash. And the Rebbe, that year, almost every time he mentioned the Rebbe Marash, he would say this year is 100 years from the Chatchila Rebbe. Out here in New York, they were celebrating, it's 100 years from the first, I think it was the Brooklyn Bridge that was built in 1883. So it was just an interesting Shgacha Pratis, because that's what a bridge is all about. The Chatchila Rebbe. You have to go across water. You have to learn how to swim. You have to have a boat. You have to be able to be skilled. But if you are going across a bridge, there could be sharks in the water. There can be whatever you want. You're just going right over it. But basically, that's what the Chatchila Rebbe means on a practical level, which is the Rebbe's approach. Do not give substance to things that are negative. And when you give substance to it, you're actually making it stronger and bigger, and especially people who exaggerate and magnify whatever the problem is. And that's why the Rebbe is so against even verbalizing things that are negative. Just go forward, just move ahead. Don't give it any substance. And ultimately, you'll see that it is something which will just get out of the way. Of course, there's a lot that could be learned about this. There's a lot of details to it. How come it works that way? But one of the things that also expressed itself is that the Rebbes of Chabad were different than other Rebbes in the sense that they did not perform open miracles. People came to them for brachas, and they definitely performed miracles, but it was always sort of more camouflaged. And it wasn't in such an open way. And it has to do with the whole approach of Chabad in general, which is another discussion. But in that sense, the Rebbe Marash was an exception. In fact, one of the things it says about the Rebbe Marash is the way he conducted himself was similar to the Baal Shem Tov, that he performed open miracles, that it was literally right there in front of your eyes, did things that were above nature. And one of the examples is when he was nostalgic, when he passed away at a very young age. He was 48 years old, and didn't expect, he wasn't well, but no one expected that would be happening. But he called in his secretary and said he wants to speak to his sons. Each one of them should come in separately. But before he did that, he took out a watch. He had those days they had a watch on a chain in the pocket of a vest. That's how they used to carry these things. Took out his watch, took a piece of paper, took the two hands of the watch, put it at a certain time. I think it was 11:20 something or other. Took a piece of paper, stuck it under so it wouldn't move. In other words, the watch was at a certain hour and a certain minute. And then the Heichaltzu was exactly that hour and that minute when he passed away. These are the kind of things that Rabbi Majeski did in an open way. And that's also the Chatchila River, which means either you can do things in a way that you have to take in consideration the laws of nature and work around it, or the Chatchila River, where you openly do things in a way that transcends nature, and then it's in a much more revealed way of seeing Hashem's bracha. But regarding this, the Chatchila Rebbe on a practical level, I once saw a letter from the Rebbe, and there's a lot along the same lines, in the same spirit. It was to a Chabad chassid who was a shliach, and he wrote the Rebbe that there's somebody in his town that is opposed to Chabad, and he is doing everything he can to undermine him, and he's having a lot of complications because of that person. So the Rebbe writes back that the reason why you're having all these complications, the reason why you're having a hard time, is because you're giving so much substance to that person. You wouldn't give any substance to him, just do what you have to do. You'll see that he will not be able to get in your way, and you'll be able to accomplish everything you need to accomplish. Which means that whether it's someone or something outside of me, or even internal, my own thoughts that are disturbing, that are not allowing me to concentrate, or thoughts that make me feel down, or thoughts that make me feel discouraged, make me give up, any kind of thoughts along those lines, rather than wrestling with it and trying to push it out of the way, if I would ignore it and just keep moving and doing what I need to do, eventually we'll see how my sort of giving attention to it and giving it substance, that is what reinforces it. And if I ignore it, it'll just stop haunting me and stop harassing me and stop getting in my way. This came up in other classes where I said that in Tanya, in a number of places, the Rebbe says that if a thought comes to a person that's disturbing thought, you should push it away with two hands. Anyone remember how we explained that? Which means that most people, how do they push away a thought that's negative? They tell themselves, stop thinking about this because this will make you feel down, or this will make you feel discouraged, or this will make you feel less enthusiastic about mitzvahs. Talking to myself that way is actually giving substance to the thought. So at the same time that I'm trying to push the thought out of my head, but the mere fact that I'm telling myself why this thought is negative, that itself is giving it substance. That's called pushing it away with one hand, but holding on to it with the other hand. So what's with two hands? Two hands means that if there's a thought that's disturbing me, just ignore it. Just get busy with something else. Put your mind into something else that you're doing, and we'll see that the thought will just eventually stop. People think that it's impossible. This thought keeps coming back to me. There's no way that I can control it, but it's not true. if I would not pay attention to the thought, it would just stop coming back. And for as many times that I spoke to many people, everyone had the same reaction. Where I asked them, do you remember when you were younger, there was a certain thought that bothered you, that you were almost like obsessed with it, you couldn't get it out of your head? Most people say, yeah, I had things like that. And then the next question is it still going on? No, that was when I was in high school, okay. Was that issue ever resolved? No, not necessarily. So how come it stopped? There are new problems. And I was thinking about the new things. And I was so busy with the other things that came up that I forgot to think about this. And being that I stopped paying attention to it, it stopped knocking on my door. And one time when I gave this class, a student showed me an article, because the truth is, even though this is a pure Hasidic concept, but psychology over the years started to evolve also to focus on the positive reinforcement and all things like that. This was an article written by someone, and he also writes about this, about not giving substance to your negative thoughts, and he compares it to a cat. That if you feed a cat, and you don't want it to come, it comes to your door, and you feel bad for the cat, so you give him some milk, you can be guaranteed it'll be back tomorrow. So the only way to make sure that it doesn't keep coming back is to stop feeding him. So his line was, don't feed the cat. And CAT is an acronym for counterproductive attitudes and thoughts. That was his words. Okay, so that's the Chatchila River. And naturally, if it's a birthday, we know that on the day of a birthday, the mazel of that person is the strongest. And being that it's a Nasi, a leader of the Jewish nation, so actually, like the Rebbe's birthday, same with Rabbi Marash's birthday, it affects all of us, and it brings bracha to all of us. So it's a day we can sort of tap in to strengthen ourselves in this area of serving Hashem in a way with the Chatchila River. We don't have a picture of the Rebbe Marash, but it does say that he had striking resemblance to the Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was his grandson. And the extent of it was, the Rebbe told a story that the Frierdiker Rebbe visited Israel in 1929. Naturally, anybody in Israel that had any connection to the Chabad came to see the Frierdiker Rebbe. So there was a chassid there who was an older chassid, and he was there from the times of the Rebbe Marash. He knew the Rebbe Marash. He came into the Frierdiker Rebbe's room, took one look at him, and he fainted. Why did he faint? Because he literally saw the image of the Rebbe Marash. That's how his resemblance was so strong. Okay. So we will continue here. Yeah. Marenu Arav Reb Shmuel. His name was Shmuel. And in the family, they were wondering where the name comes from because there's nobody in the family with the name Shmuel. And Tzemach Tzedek later told them that apparently the name was named after a certain hidden tzaddik whose name was Shmuel and passed away on that day. So he named him after him. But it's also known, it says in the Sichos, that his neshama was connected to the neshama of Shmuel Hanavi. So the Rebbe Marash once said, I feel like I'm 100 years old. This is shortly before he passed away. And the explanation of that was that Shmuel Hanavi lived to the age of 52. But Rebbe Marash lived to the age of 48. So between the two of them, he was 100 years old. There was 52 and 48, he was 100 years old. Okay, so we are here in the Mamar lessons in Kuntres Heichaltzu. We're in the middle of Ois Tez 16. So it's page 122, 123. Actually, we did 123. And he explained that based on everything we learned before, we understand that this klipa, which is the klipa of midya, divisiveness and separation, conflict, the basis of all this hate is yeshus, and that's something which goes against the essence of Hashem, tzidizim. In other words, other character traits are individual character traits, and therefore a person could be having a certain flaw in one of his character traits, but it doesn't affect other things. This is something which is sort of an ingredient that has an effect on everything. It's all encompassing. Spiritually, we know that every Aveira is connected to different aspects in the spiritual realm. And even though there are 613 commandments, but altogether they're all connected to the 4 letters in Hashem's name, which means there's certain mitzvahs and Aveiras that affect the Yud. They cause a defect in the Yud of Hashem's name. Other things cause a defect in the Hey of Hashem's name. Other things in the Vav and other things in the final Hey. But Midyan, the clip of Midyan, which is divisiveness and conflict and hate, this affects the entire name of Hashem. And that's what he's saying, that this is something which encompasses everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Like when you like
Right.
But like you can be Shuba like with any sin. So like when some of they respect another letter besides the head, maybe return above the head.
So that part about the hay is a little bit different. That's talking more about my neshama. That our neshama comes from Hashem. And specifically, which part of Hashem, which aspect of Hashem is sort of the source of my neshama is the hay. So therefore, when I do an Aveira, he brought the analogy of a rope. That if you have a rope and you pull it down, on this end, the top end also goes down. So being like they're connected to Hashem's hay, and I do an Aveira, which means I bring myself down to a place of impurity to Klippa, I'm bringing down the hay of Hashem's name into Klippa. So, and in general, in Chassidus, a lot of the things are, first they explain things in a more general way, in a more specific way. So ultimately it's not a contradiction, which means generally speaking, it's the hay, and then being more specific, it affects different letters of Hashem's name. So on page 124, the second paragraph from the top. So he said, and therefore, after everything that he explained, a person who cares about his soul and wants to be in a good place, he doesn't want his neshama to be immersed in the world of klipa, the world of sitra achra. He doesn't want that his soul should fall down to a place of negative character traits. He wants to do what he's responsible to do, to serve Hashem the way he's supposed to serve Hashem. And that's by refining and improving his natural character traits. In other words, of course, Chassidus is learning about the greatness of Hashem. And Chassidus is about developing love for Hashem, developing awe for Hashem. But Chassidus is also very much about refining our character traits, which means all these things you learn about in Pirkei Avos and all the character traits we talk about in Torah, when the purpose of studying Chassidus is to refine our character traits, to be sensitive and caring, and to be humble and to be refined, not to have any hate or any other negative character traits along those lines. If I want to be able to do it the way it should be, persons should search time and again. In other words, to realize that just because I don't see anything on the surface, it doesn't mean that if I look a little bit better, I'm not going to find something. You have to look using the light of a candle. Neir Hashem nishmasodam. He's using the same language that we use when we talk about searching for chametz. When you search for chametz, you have to use the light of a candle. And the Gemara asks, why the light of a candle? Why can't we just search in the daylight when the sun is shining? That's a much brighter light than the light of a candle. And the answer is because we're searching in every sort of crack, every nook and cranny. That's where we're looking to see. Maybe in this little spot, there's something there. And that, the sunlight won't help me. I need a candle that I can go close to it and look. Next page. Livdeg b'churin of bizdokim. Checking in every nook and cranny, meaning to see in every open little spot, maybe a little chametz got into that. And here too, we're looking and searching. So even if I don't see it on a conscious level, I examine it closely to see, but maybe subconsciously that's where it's coming from. But if I'm not conscious, how am I going to know that it's there? How am I going to be aware of it? So we said this last time, I look at the symptoms. How do I know that there's something wrong with me internally? If I'm not a doctor and I don't do the tests myself, but I see the symptoms. I have a headache, I have pain, discomfort, there's a rash. It alerts me to look. So I have to look at the symptoms, and then I try to search and see, is this coming from a good place or from a negative place? Because really, the truth of the matter is that the biggest challenge is not so much to do what's right and not to do what's wrong. Because once it's clear, black and white, this is right and this is wrong, it's a little bit simpler. The biggest challenge is to recognize and identify what is right and what is wrong. What's coming from a good place, what's coming from a negative place. It's like in wartime, when you have the enemy who's dressed in the enemy uniform and you know who the enemy is, it's one kind of challenge to try to destroy the enemy. The challenge is much greater is when there's an enemy that's dressed like our side and as somebody who is amongst us and is a spy. These are the worst enemies because you don't know who they are and you don't know how to be, you're not careful when they're around. So a person should look to see in all the details of what's really going on internally. These are the things that are really blocking me and stopping me from serving Hashem properly. In other words, if he doesn't do that, then he's not going to be able to really refine his character traits in a proper way. To really eliminate them from his soul. Then he continues along his path with confidence, davening the way it should be, with true bittul, with truly refined character traits, and observing Torah mitzvahs the way you're supposed to. I don't know if you remember, but when we first started this Mamar, I told you there's a letter from the previous Rebbe that gives a background to the Mamar. Like, why did the Rebbe Rashab say this Mamar, which speaks so strongly about conflict and about getting along and about baseless hate? And the Frierdiker Rebbe said that at that time there was a big controversy going on in one of the certain Hasidic towns, and there were two sides. The city was split. I don't think it says in reference to what it was, but obviously it was something about running the city. And there was one particular chassid who was actually related to the previous Rebbe. And that chassid was, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that he was a true chassid, and everything he did with right intentions, but he was leading this conflict in a very strong and a very harsh way. To anybody that opposed what he wanted, he was very strong and very harsh. And in reference to this situation, the Rebbe Rashab said the Mamar. In other words, like I said, I think that the biggest, strongest message from the Mamar is that it can be somebody who is a true chassid, means well, good intentions, but nevertheless, we still have to check ourselves and see if what I'm doing is really coming from the right place or it's coming from the wrong place. And if it's coming from the wrong place, then ultimately it'll only bring negative results. It's of course a humorous statement, but there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos where it says there's two kinds of machlekes, two kinds of arguments. One is l'shem shamayim, which means you're arguing about things for the sake of heaven, and the other one is machlekes shalei shem shamayim. Literally, it means two people could be fighting about money issues, about a job. They could be fighting about a position. That's called leilushem. It's not a heavenly subject. It's a secular subject. It's an earthly subject. It's a personal subject. Where they're fighting about who's the best person to be the Rav in the city, who's the best person to be the Sheikh, who should be the best person to teach these children. And both are arguing about heavenly subject, like what's going to be the best for Yiddishkeit. And it gives an example, like Shammai and Hillel, they also argued, but they argued the Shem Shemayim. Those are the things that are less because it's godly. But other machlekes, and they'll just, everything is going to fall apart because it's not for the right reason. So people say in a humorous way that when two people argue about things that are not spiritual things, those are the kind of machlekes that could end. Because you sit down and you say, listen, look what's happening. You're splitting in the community. People are fighting over this issue, the money issues, or whatever it may be. And, maybe you'll just compromise over here and you'll compromise over there. And it's possible to compromise. When people are fighting about heavenly issues, everyone says, I can't compromise. It's not about me. It's about Hashem. So how can I compromise? So those are the fights that never end. Because everybody feels that they can't give up. They can't give up on their position. But the truth is, this feeling that I can't give up and I can't compromise because of Hashem, is it really purely because of Hashem? Or beneath the surface, it's about me and it's a power struggle. So that's what he said, that we need to take a candle and sort of search, of course, figuratively speaking, have to search inside to know where it's really coming from. Then he concludes the summary, Sinas Chinam, the Yesa Klal or Mocha L'chol Midas Rois, being that Sinas Chinam, baseless hate, is like the source for all of the negative character traits. That's why Tzricha Chipus B'Yeser needs to be searched for more than anything else. And B'Yur L'Gamri, we have to destroy it completely because this is the source of everything else. Yeshus, which leads to baseless hate, is the source of all of the negative character traits. And if I get rid of that, it'll also have an effect on everything else. So this has a lot to do with the time that we're in. And we mentioned it when we started at the Pesach, is that we're now in the middle of Sfiras Omer. And Sfiras Omer is the time where we mourn the passing of Rabbi Akiva's students. The Rabbi Akiva's students, there was a plague, and we're talking about a huge amount of people, 24,000 of the students, that they passed away during this time. The reason why they passed away was actually what it's talking about in this Mamar, that they weren't being respectful to one another the way it should be. And like I said then, it doesn't mean chas v'shalom they did things which are against Torah, and it doesn't mean they really didn't respect at all, but obviously it means according to their level, according to their standards, the respect for one another should have been on a higher level. But why didn't they respect one another? They were great Torah scholars. They were students of Rabbi Akiva. So if you remember, we explained because amongst the students, even though they all had the same teacher, but they were all different in their personalities, like all people are different. And each one served Hashem in their particular way, using the language of Chassidus. This one was a Chesed person, this one was a Gevura person, Tiferes. And that could because they had a Rebbe that promoted so much Ahavas Yisrael. Because of the Ahavas Yisrael, they so much wanted to influence the other, because they felt that what they're doing and the way they are, the path that they're following is the best path. And they tried to influence the others to follow that path. And they couldn't tolerate the others to have that path. And as a result of that, it led to a point where it affected the honor and respect that one should have for another. And that's where it went wrong. In other words, even though it came from a good place, they had Ahavas Yisrael, and they realized that the way they're davening or learning or serving Hashem has so many advantages. So therefore, out of Ahavas Yisrael, they tried to persuade the other person to do the same. The other person didn't go along with it. So they recognize, okay, they are who they are, I am who I am. And, like we said, we can agree to disagree, but it shouldn't have one iota of an effect on the respect to one another. And being that it did, that's where they went wrong. And that's, like it says here, even though there were great tzaddikim, but there was an underlying sort of negativity there that got in the way. And that's why it ended up being in such a way. So obviously it means now, this time of the year, during these 6 weeks, 7 weeks, this is the time that we have to work on correcting it. And that's one of the reasons why we actually learn Pirkei Avos these weeks. Because Pirkei Avos is all about character traits. This is the source in the Gemara, and the source on character. Okay, so now 17, this is the conclusion of, we're not going to do the next part of the Maimon, we're just going to do until 17. The next part goes off on a much higher plane, very deep chassidus. So we're going to do till 17. When you keep us midyan, going back to the beginning of the Maimer, this is klipa of midyan. It comes from the word modin and riva, which means strife and arguing, quarreling. This is divisiveness and fragmentation between people, between families, between communities. So this is the same concept as baseless hate that was discussed in the Maimon. And baseless hate is a hate b'chumanagid v'klov Hashem Havaya. It's not something which opposes one of the letters of Hashem's name, but this is the opposite of what Hashem is all about, what Shem Havaya is all about. Hashem is all about unity. As we'll explain later in detail, that Shem Havaya is all about unity. And therefore, Klipas Midyan is the exact opposite of that. Klipas Midyan, Menagid was Elagamri. And remember, he asked the question, why isn't this Klipa one of the 7 nations? 7 nations represent 7 categories of Klipa, which includes all the hundreds of details. How come Midyan isn't one of the 7? So on the surface, it might appear, well, I guess it's not as severe as these 7, but the truth is just the opposite. It's not one of the 7 because it's above the 7. It's the source of the 7 character traits. And this is more harmful than the 7 nations of Canaan. Like lust, or anger, or murder, violence, haughtiness. These character traits, they cause a defect and a blemish in one of the letters of Hashem Havaya. The same thing with other things which are transgressions in the Torah. Each one of those 365 commandments, Rahman Aslan, Pagim, it causes a blemish or a defect in one level of the spiritual realm. And this causes a blemish in the whole, all-encompassing of the spiritual realm, because of the whole name, Shem Havaya. But in parentheses, he adds, don't take it lightly, the fact that it's only 1 letter. Become up and ksiv the Neik of Shem Havaya. There's a term in the Chumash, the Neik of Shem Havaya literally means somebody who, God forbid, verbalizes the opposite of a blessing and in reference to Hashem's name. But nekev in Hebrew also means nekeva, making a hole, puncturing. Shaydei shepegim b'prat echad m'shisal leiseser pegim gamken b'klova shem havaya. That the truth is, even if you have a defect in one letter, you're also causing a general weakness in the whole shem havaya. For example, a person has 365 gidin, which is the veins. If there's one of the veins are punctured, there's a hole, and as a result of that is bleeding, it doesn't only make that vein weak, the whole body becomes weaker because he's losing blood. So even though technically he only injured a certain vein, but it does cause a weakness in the whole body. Same thing with Shemavaya. Even when a person does an Avera and causes a defect in one letter of Hashem's name, like you gave the example of anger, but nevertheless, it does cause a weakness in everything, the whole spiritual realm. Hashem can be Klipas Midyan, but in contrast to that, Midyan is different. It's not a detail that affects sort of by the way, or it affects through a domino effect, affects the whole Shemavaya, but this is lichatchila directly in a opposition to Shemavaya. Period with Chalkus. Pegam beklovos Shemavaya. This is something which causes a defect in the entire name of Shemavaya. This klipa is extremely difficult to correct, more than all the other klipas of the 7 Midas Rois. Gambi Surah Torah. Even more than transgressing something which is a clear violation of something in Torah. It might not be as severe as Midyan, as this inyan of division and separation of hearts. Proof of this is the first Galus, when the first Beis Mikdash was destroyed, it was alavenis chamurim because they really violated very severe things in Torah. Avodah Zarah, they worshipped idols. Gila Arayas, they committed adultery. Shvichas Damim, they committed murder. Mikol Makim, nevertheless, Hayurak Shivim Shana, they were only in Galus for 70 years, which means that it took 70 years to correct all the damage that was done spiritually through these awareness. What about our Galus? Galus Achranazeh, this last Galus was not in those days, in the second Beis Mikdash, they weren't worshiping idols. They weren't committing sins like adultery or like murder. What was going on that caused the Beis Mikdash was destroyed was sinas chinam, baseless hate. Okay, you do as it's known, page 130. The Bavain sinas chinam nechar abayis, and the Beis Mikdash was destroyed because of that avera. And look at what's happening with this Golus. Nimshich ha-Golus hamar yesem yudches me'eshanim. This Golus has lasted over 1,800 years. Now it's over almost 2,000 years. But then it was over 1,800 years, which means that was able to be corrected in 70 years. And this sin is harder to correct, and even 1,800 years at that point, and now 2,000 years, it still wasn't corrected. It means that there's something about this klipa which makes it so much more severe and harder to correct. And therefore, we have to be so much more careful and make sure that we don't slip into this thing of sinas chinam. And even if a person feels that I'm doing it because of the right reason, I have to look again and examine again and be 100% sure that the way I'm acting and what I'm doing about it is really the way I'm supposed to according to Torah. Okay, we have another 2 pages. Then we'll conclude. After that, we'll do a review on where we left off, and then we'll learn a new mind. Okay. So today it'll be like last week. We're going to break now for davening, and then at 9:45, Mrs. Lemony will teach Mashiach Lemud. On my class also, I'll do it at 9:45. The girls know that it's important. Yeah.
Mashiach can be 1 hour today.
9:45, yeah.
You just told me. Think about it.
This.
So Robert Darren,
What?
Oh, wait a second. Today is Wednesday. But it's number one.
Yeah. So. And I mean, you're about to.
Wait a second, today we're advanced to number one. I made a mistake. No, advanced to number one.
9 now? So when are they happening?
At 10? Advanced is coming. I made a mistake. Embarrassed.
9:15 to 9:45 is 30 down. 9:45 the shift is in the both levels.
No,
At
not,
quarter to 10.
no, it's a mistake. We're embarrassed. I'm sorry. Number one, not having a shirt. Tomorrow. And. Right.
Wait. Go. It's violence, you got it go. Do I say make you? Okay, without you. No, it's good. I be sorry, without you. Sure, I think so, but it. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's so nice, so good, great. Up and down, right, I can bring up all this. Right. Right, so Mom, I like it. Like, I'll say, I love it. I really like long, you know? Right. Right, you're being like, yeah. Right. That's true, that's true. I'll see you later. No, we talk, we'll see you after, yeah. Hi, everybody. Hey, well, it's love, you're here. Basically, level 2 has a great, and the one is not. Even though in the chat, it said otherwise, or who just said otherwise, for that, so. The break, but see you have. Yeah. This is Susie, she has the partner. Yeah, like. Trying to like. Unpassable, like how close I over. Yeah, like, we're not going to read our team. So I told him like, yeah, I think about you, like you heard a scream coming from the room, we thought it was you, and you remember it's not you. Like, I don't know, we did some fun. But that's so nice, yeah. Yeah, but I didn't actually did yet, and the other class. Red team, yeah, you know, like the built that. Yeah, let's just do. Yeah, 2 minutes, I don't know, just maybe it's okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I'm psyched. I think like being out all day and coming home to bed, like unpacking bed, like, yeah, like they're like, what's the schedule? I'm like, not like this. I think I'm normally, yeah. Know where you live, yes. Right?